Okay, this tutorial is going to begin by talking about relational operators out of Chapter 3. A few things I need to mention to you. Let's go ahead and create a program that goes over some of this. So I will start up Eclipse. And I believe I've already mentioned this, but if you're running a newer version of Eclipse, or if you're running a new operating system besides Windows XP, you probably need to install a more recent version of Eclipse. In class, we're using Ganymede. Pretty much whatever version you use will work pretty much the same way. I'm going into Java. I'm going to create a new folder here. I'll call this Chapter 3. Most of you have already done this. And I'll set this up as my workspace, and I'll say OK. Oh, I'm going to make this the default so it doesn't keep asking me about that. And that way for the rest of the week I can avoid that. Take just a minute for it to come up. The topic we're going to discuss is the obvious relational operators. Let's go ahead and create a new Java project, which I will call Relational Operators. So I'll go to File, New, Java Project. I'll call this Relational Operators. Be careful that your first letter is lowercase. It's the way most of us make our programs in Java. I'll say Finish. I copied that name. I now can right-click here. I can say New Class Relational Operators. I can even be a little bit lazy. I'm almost hesitant to tell you this. You can click Public Static Void Main here. It'll write the code for you. Yeah. But most of you need to practice writing that, so don't do that. Don't try this at home, okay? Now, let's go ahead and just talk about the relational operators. So I say here, you have this section. I'm going to paste that as a block comment into my code. Actually, maybe I'll just paste it as a comment like this all the way down so that you can view it in my code. You need to know all of these commands. If you're familiar with C++, you should already know this stuff. They're called relational operators because you can use them in if statements. You can say if 2 is less than 3, some consequence will happen. System.out.println 2 is less than 3 is the punchline. But you can use any of these. Is less than, is greater than. Notice the equals is not what you would expect it to be. You have to use a double equals if you're going to compare two numbers. So I'll say here if 1 is equal to 1, you could output something to that effect. Now you'll notice here that I am not using braces with my if statements. An if statement contains or controls the very next thing that comes at it. So in this particular case, it's just one line of code. If you use braces here, I could write hundreds of lines of code between the braces. If you don't have a brace, it just controls the very next thing, which in this case is not everything in the brace, it's just one line. So you'll see that pretty often. The same thing can be done with any kind of a loop. Sometimes you have braces on loops, sometimes you don't. If you don't have the brace, it only controls whatever the next line is. So you should see these lines of code, and you should see these messages. We know that if you're going to write as less than or equal to, you got to write it in the same way you say it. Mathematically, you always say is less than or equal to. You never say it is equal to or less than. It just isn't said. Greater than or equal to, it's written the way it's said. Not equal to is kind of an interesting one. If, this is the only one that's really out of the ordinary besides the equals equals. I'll say if 2 is not equal to 3, which it isn't, I can output 2 is not equal to 3. And you should see all of that. Let's go ahead and run it. So obviously you see all of that stuff. Each of these conditions are met. 2 is not equal to 3, so you do this. For each of these things to happen, this condition must be true. It's easy enough to test if that condition is true. You can even see it. I can do a system out on the condition itself. System.out.println. If you ever want to see if the condition is true or not, just put it in a system out. 2 is less than 3. Java is very aware of what that is. It's true. 2 is less than 3. It's figuring that out for you. Questions about that? Oh, you missed that because it isn't. 1 is equal to 1. Sorry about that. I just mistyped it. If you guys see anything else like that, don't let me write something up here that isn't right. Jump all over me. Okay, so we should feel good about these relational operators. They are called relational operators because they relate the left to the right and they make the comparison. There is something here called De Morgan's rule. I think what I'd like to do is let me do this in a separate tutorial.